Greetings. So this is going to be the walkthrough for my Flatiron React project. I hope it's exciting, I hope it's thorough, and I hope at the end of this walkthrough you, as the viewer, has a better understanding of the process I took to complete the project, how the project works, and my understanding of the subject. So right now you can see a blank Google homepage. So let's first let me first open up my editor. So here is VS Code. Let's close all this. Close this. Now, since this is my local since this is my local environment, I'm going to skip the bundle install, and I'm going to skip the rake db migrate. So here we can just jump straight into how exactly the code is going to work, and then at the end I'll show you the actual walkthrough through localhost, through my local server. So to begin, there were a few let's call them server side settings that I had to adjust. One of them was to add this file called a proc file. This proc file basically tells the web client to start. So whenever I run rake start, which I'll show you at the end of this technical walkthrough, it'll run client and npm start, which will take us to localhost 3000. However, because of the way I used, let's pull it up for a second, client source containers, I have it here in index. Because of the way I used create store with compose enhancers, basically the way I applied thunk to this application required me to utilize two separate PIDs, so I would never be jeopardizing user experience or speed by having the client and the server be trying to access the application on the same PID. So that is why here, let me pull it back up, let me open it to the side. This will execute the Rails server on 3001. And I'll be able to walk you through this a little bit more when I actually start the server, but just to get it all out of the way, it starts with index.js. I use compose enhancers or compose. It's really dependent upon whether Redux DevTools extension is being utilized. Otherwise, it just runs the compose, which I've imported from Redux. I've created a store, with the root reducer, compose enhancers. I've applied the middleware with thunk. So let's pull up my reducers. So here we have the root reducer. Pretty standard. Root reducer is a variable, which I'm calling combine reducers from Redux. And because I've imported that, I'm able to just combine all the reducers into a simple store. Now, these are the variables or the terms, I guess, that I'll be using to whenever I use map state. Map state to props. I will be using these keywords. So that's just something good to keep in mind. Within index.js, we'll see here, I've used provider, and within the provider, I'm calling app.js, which is here. App.js is just another component at this point, and within here, I've used app router. I've created another file called router under this directory router. This is because I found the CSS to actually be applied better, more full page instead of just at the top. within app router, we'll see here, this is where the actual application starts running. So here we have the header. Within the header contains the information about contact. The header also gives you links to drafting the cards and storing the cards, like viewing the cards within your deck. So that's pretty cool. Let's see, a few other things. The real brunt of this application is running a mock drafter for Magic the Gathering. So, and able to incorporate that, I went through a variety of attempts and manifestations before I landed on a simplified version where all I really had to do was code a card container, because I was trying to handle this in a way that I had like the booster container handling the drafting, and then having the card container handling only the cards, but then there was too much overlap and too much repetition, so I was able to dry that up using the card container. Within the card container, using standard component container practice, I have a single card component for my card container. Similarly, within my components, I have deck and the deck input, just to make the deck container really be filled out as well. This deck and card are both presentational components, and you'll see when I actually get end of the container how they're used. The deck input, this is still in development. I want to be able to have the user actually like name their deck and create their deck, and more of a management with the store. But so this one aside, we're going to ignore this one completely for now. It's just completely experimental, something I'm working on building. So card container, I have decided to import a couple key actions from two separate action files. This is important because without them, I'm not able to actually call data from my forward API. Magic the Gathering .io actually has a forward API that you can call. There's also a wrapper that you can use around your application. So eventually I would like to actually wrap the API, so I don't have to keep making these foreign calls and using a proxy to get through to prevent cores from popping up an error and saying access denied. Fetch Booster is exactly what it sounds like. I'll open up this to the side. Fetch Booster is exactly what it sounds like. I'm using a proxy with the target URL, which right now is corresponding to the, as of today, I think, the last recent set. So eventually what I want to have the user do is be like, okay, like what set do you want to build a draft from? Let's see, do you want the most recent one, Mythic 20 or Magic 20? Or do you want to use the most, or the last one, or do you want to use Dominaria or any of the Ravnica sets? So what we have here within Fetch Booster is a really standard async fetch request. So here is the key variable, which I'm using fetch. I'm combining these two. The cores anywhere.heroku app sometimes goes down and then it'll come back up. It's just a matter of time. But for my purposes, it fits it well. Within here, I'm using response.json, making sure it's in a format that we can work with, that my server can understand. Then I'm actually specifying within that set, within this JSON response, exactly what I want. So I'm calling this from the keyword cards, and that will actually allow me to navigate and manipulate the data even faster without so much client-side manipulation. And then we're just going to return it to show you exactly what those mean in reducer form. I'll pull up the drafting reducer. Basically, it's a switch case. We're going to be returning this right here. Default is just going to be state. That's pretty self-explanatory. The other one that I'm importing over here in card container is create card. Now, create card is another action from it's an action from the card actions. Now, this create card here is actually going to allow me to post the data that my user has chosen to my server to persist it. And then when the user wants to view it, they can just go to the deck container, the deck side of the client, and it'll render them all. And that's very useful if you want to keep touch with if you want to keep up with your deck. The only thing I need to work on here with card container is right now hard-coded card count. I speak about all this at length in my blog, but card count, because it's hard-coded within the cards container, whenever the user leaves cards container and say clicks the link to view deck or something, this is going to be set to 0. So I need to actually persist this to the store, but for right now, for the project's timeline for where we're at, this is totally fine. I'm totally acceptable with how it's running. It just means that there's always more to learn, and there's always more to work on. You know, being a perfectionist is hard. So yeah, let's just get into how the actual card container is going to work. So let's just see what it's going to render, right? So within the cards container, here, you know, using connect to pass it down to the props, to his child components, we have state.draft, state.deck, state.cards, right? Within the render, we have an on-click. Now, this button is just gonna call the function handle fetch booster. And because I've imported fetch booster and connected it down here within the export default, this is actually going to make our async request and call the foreign API, utilizing the proxy to get through the cores to make sure it's all valid. It's going to open up the pack for us. Then it'll be stored within the drafts, right? So that's why I've actually mapped state to props here. I've actually, I want the data from the drafting side, from whatever the booster has, whatever I've manipulated. So we have here draft objects. Then, let's see, in the render cards props, right? We have a constant. Let's see if I can't make it all on one line. There we go, there we go. Okay. Card props is actually the information that we want for the user to see. This is going to be the whole booster pack. So we got this.props.draft objects, and within that we have the drafting data. Now, right now, just ignore these console.logs, just for me to see exactly what's going on. So right now, I have this conditional that says if this state.card count, this state key element that I had hard coded is less than 40, since I only want the user to be able to go up to 40 cards within their deck, it'll call two things. This.handle fetch booster, which is going to fetch another booster, right? And then it's also going to call handle card counter. It's a simple counter. It's going to store the new booster within the store, get rid of the old one. So as well within render cards props. So here we have we're going to return this variable, which is just a store response, right? It's going to be a JavaScript object, and I need to manipulate that and be able to show the user exactly the elements of that which I want, right? So we're going to map it. Because I'm using map, I need to make sure within the card component here, I'm having an individual key. Let's undo that. So here we have the IDV card is the element of the foreign API, the actual card itself. And then within that, I'm actually sorting out key or ID, name, text, mana cost, that sort of stuff. And then this, I will actually pass this handle add card to be utilized or called when the user, get ready, there it is, over to the side, boom. When the user clicks the card that they want, right now it's only in the name, so they actually have to click the name. It's going to actually call this function from the card container because I passed it in, because I passed it down to it, right? And here we just have a simple display. It's taking in the information, the props from its parent, in this case the cards container, and it's just going to show us here's the mana cost, here's the text, here's the name. I did this right here, card ID equals props.card ID, because I need that ID persisted so I can differentiate individual keys when I use map within deck container. So it was a simple thing, adjust the database, make sure that's being stored, and then we can call that and not get any errors. The one error that I keep getting is actually just due to a pre-flight request from how everything is set up. So whenever I'm actually making a post request to my API, which I'll show you in just a second, I'm sending two requests because it's an options request, not a get header or post. So I still need to get around that, but for now, because I know exactly what's causing it, or at least I have a good idea, I'm ignoring it and just moving on. Making sure that what I have now works, is functional, and we can iron out all the bugs as we go along. So that's the card side of things. Within the deck container, deck container is very similar to card container in that they have similar purposes, but I need them to be different for the sake of the user experience, for the user sees, and for like simplification of code. So here within the deck container, you notice I have render cards props here and render cards props over here in cards container. This is because they're almost identical functions, but within the deck container, I actually just need them to show me the key. You can see here the individual card. The database, I've created a row for the multiverse ID, and that's going to be the card's actual ID with the card's name. I won't show you the deck.js because it's essentially just the same thing as card.js. Here I've handled the link route, which is just going to show me a router, and this is going to show me, it's going to allow you to delete your deck and draft another deck. Handle on click is another thing that's being called here. It's going to delete the cards, delete cards. I've had to create a specific route for that. So I will delete all the cards in the database. And here within the render, you can see handle link route. So you're going to call this function, which is going to return all this. And then within this div, this render cards props, and it's just going to return this function, which is going to return the mapping to our deck component. Didn't really need much here. I just need to access the actual cards that the user has submitted. Thus, we have state.cards. Within here, I've had to import one action from card actions, just the delete cards ones. So that's essentially the client side from a technical perspective, all the working components. So what I want to show you next is going to be the API. I created the Rails, I created the API with the Rails create hyphen API. So let's see here. We need our app and our controllers. We have a cards controller, and pretty simple. It's gonna render this on everything. The only really unique ones here are create and delete all. So here, card.create is going to force create it, and that might actually be where my error is coming up. Interesting. This is why reviews are incredibly useful. Parameters name, parameters ID, and then here we have card.delete all, where I use the Rails, or where I use the Ruby delete all function. I think that's actually Rails, never mind. And I've used, let's see, within the model, card, pretty standard, just you need it, don't need any of that. From the database, show you the schema. Right now, very simple, cards, name, multiverse ID, right? Migrations, creating the cards table. Right now it's pretty standard. Let me show you my routes. Here we go, within the scope API, so no matter what calls I'm making through any of my actions, if I need to call the API, I always have to forward it with like a /API first. And this is useful from a developer perspective because then you know exactly what you're calling, whereas if you have resources decks, resources cards, this way, no matter what, if you know, oh, my code's not calling the API correctly, okay, you just need to scope it, right? This is what I was talking about, the resources delete. I've had to specify on the whole collection with the action delete all. So that is why that is being used. So let's get into it. Let me CD into Magic the Gathering React app, and we'll start rake start. Usually just takes a minute. Let's see here. Okay. See, here we go. This is what I was talking about. By using the proc file, we have this PID124 is actually being used for the Rails server, and PID123 is actually being used for the client. It's loading our localhost 3000 as we wait. Here we go. Simple header right now, functional. So let's go ahead and draft it. So here, this is the button I was talking about, the open a pack. Now our request has been made to the foreign API, and here we have a rendered set of cards. It's very time leveler, Jiang Yanggu. Probably really butchered that. And then what I need to do for this in the future is you can see certain things. Oh, they don't have any lands here. That's cool. I'm impressed. This is a good pack. So then you can click on one. Let's just add Teferi Time Raveler, objectively a good card. By clicking on that, it'll start another one. We could go through this 40 times, but I'm going to spare you. But you can see how it's working. Another Teferi, let's go ahead and grab it. Now the actual limited drafting doesn't quite work this way within the game. What you do is somebody would open up a pack of 15 cards and then choose one and then pass that pack to somebody else. And then they choose one. So the rarities are going to have to be algorithmically manipulated, as well as certain cards being nixed. Because you don't actually receive them that often. A lot of those cards are such high value that they're picked up almost immediately. And if you actually draft a deck like this, you would be incredibly dominant. But you can see here we have the names, we have their mana cost, and we have their text. So at least the user can see exactly what they're grabbing, right? It's also a good way to explore the set if nobody's ever explored it before, or they just want to have the feeling of like opening packs again. What I want to have eventually done is to import everything in a very good in a card form. That's going to require wrapping of the API around my application, because it's going to make the fetch calls. It's going to make the presentation of the data a little bit more complex, and I would like to cut out as much of that as possible. So let's see, we've chosen 4 cards now. Let's view our deck. And here, this is the error I was talking about. I think it's actually because I'm force creating these objects no matter what they are. We have the Death Curtain Ledge, we have the Teferi Time Raveler, we have the Casualties of War, and it looks like we have 3 extra boxes here for what I believe to be... Yes. Yeah. So I'm getting these errors. 2 children with the same key null. This is because I'm force adding right now, force creating objects, and some of those objects are actually yeah, these server status 500s, and these are because the SQLite 3 isn't supposed to be used in a way that causes like, oh my gosh, how's it put? I talk about it at length within my blog, this specific error, that it's not meant to handle multiple requests at the same time. The ways I've read to get around it are to actually like close your server, or like to close your console, but I don't think I can because I'm using that proc file. So this has been an error, and you can see Teferi here. Here's yeah, and you can see our cards here. I might have to do a wait and make sure things are actually added before I start adding another card, because I think what's happening is, like, we should have 2 Teferis here. We're not having 2 Teferis, and that's because I think we're clicking them too fast. So there's still some experimentation at resolving these errors that needs to happen, but we can delete it. It's totally gone. We can go home. I have nothing on the home page right now, but it does take us back to the home page, the about section, about this. Here's the footer, a little bit of some contact email, me and my email. Get back to our deck. Click it. Yep, we have nothing in our deck. Here's our draft. Let's open another one. There we go. So essentially, this is the application in a nutshell, and I hope you've enjoyed it. It's been really rewarding for me, both as like a fan of Magic the Gathering and a fan of programming, to code something which on the surface has a very simple appeal, but once you get into the inner workings, it gets a little bit more complex. So that's my walkthrough. Shoot me a question on GitHub, or now you have my email down here at the bottom. If you have any questions, we'd love to collaborate, love to follow up. I got some other neat ideas regarding Dungeons and Dragons and campaign creations that are coming in the future, so stay tuned.